Welcome to A Day for Adventure, the premier outdoor podcast that will get you off your butt and outside. I'm Will,
I'm Trevor.
And I'm Ben.
and for this episode, we will be talking about how to plan your first day hike. Now, just a little bit of info before we jump in. When we're talking about your day hike, we're talking a little bit above the classic walk in the park, going a little bit farther into the wilderness and having a good time. But since we are going into the wilderness, there is a new safety risk. Farther you go away from civilization, the longer it takes for EMS or or other help to get there. So we do have a few main points before you decide where to hike. And the biggest one is to know your limits.
So if you're when you're looking at your limits, you want to kind of gauge how fast you can normally walk and how long you're going to be wanting to be out and all of that. So most people generally walk about 2 to 3 miles an hour on flat terrain. Some people like me can walk 4, but that's kind of I'm an outlier. Um, so just in general, if you want to only go out for a couple hours because you're starting out, you maybe want to keep it your hike maybe as 5 or 6 miles if you only want to be out for 3 hours and you think you walk about 2 miles an hour.
Yeah,
If you want to go farther, you can. I would recommend just for your first time though, definitely keep it a little bit smaller. 5 miles, I think, is pretty good medium, generally speaking, in mileage. But
yeah,
yeah, William, you
the
go.
yeah, the important thing is that since you are a bit new to both hiking and to the backcountry, it can be a little bit intimidating and it can be more physically stressful than you think. As when walking on a road or straight around town, maybe a little bit easier, the hilly nature, some of the more inconsistent weather can make things harder than they first see. Essentially, this is kind of the idea of not having your eyes be bigger than your stomach. You want to take things small and build up. So, especially if you're new with camp skills or new to the outdoors, we don't recommend you go too far into the backcountry. As the farther you go, if something goes wrong, you have to put in more effort and more skills to be able to safely either get out of the backcountry or wait till help arrives. Which, speaking of making sure that help arrives, whenever you go into the backcountry, out hiking, out camping, doesn't matter what the activity is, you got to let someone know. You want to not just let someone know that you're heading out for a hike, but being clear on where you're going and when you'll be back. This way, if you get lost or if you get hurt, someone can know when you are supposed to return, and if you don't, send help.
And another thing, kind of basing off of safety stuff, is you have to know like the temperatures of the day to plan on how much water you're going to bring. So you have to bring water in general. It's what keeps you alive. But depending on how hot the day is, equates to how much water you should be drinking while doing a physical activity like your first day hike. Um, the one I can remember off the top of my head is out at Summit, we get Black Flag days, which is the worst. Um, and you should be drinking about a Nalgene. So that equates to what, a liter, right, guys?
Yeah, about a
Yeah,
liter.
Yeah,
yeah,
about a
about
liter almost every hour, and taking breaks, I think, every 15 or 30 minutes, right, Will? That was Black Flag
Yeah,
days?
Black Flag, we'd have around above 90 degrees with higher humidity. And
Mm-hmm.
in that case, most of our program areas would shut down or would be running at essentially like a 15 minutes on, 45 minutes off.
Yeah, that's what it
Our
was.
heat exhaustion and heat stroke is incredibly deadly once it progresses. It's what, like a 6 out of 10 mortality rate once we get to that level. So the biggest,
Something along those lines. I'd have to check that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, that was, I think,
Um,
what our EMS officer told us when we were getting some a basic safety presentation for the camp guides.
Yeah.
As
yeah.
when, additionally, when you're going out into the backcountry and going to the backcountry, we need to go through these equipment called the 10 essentials.
Yeah. So the National Park Service has designated the 10 essentials as basically all the things you should carry on any form of pretty much any sort of outdoor adventure of any type. And I think they're very well thought out. Um, I think let's just go straight through them. I got them pulled up right here. So, first one is going to be navigation, which is our map and compass, GPS, heck, even a phone would be in that classification. Sun protection, that means things like sunglasses, sunscreen, hats, and even things like just staying out of the sun in general or picking a good trail that keeps you out of the sun on hot days. Insulation, jackets, hats, gloves, rain jackets, all that kind of stuff. Um, you got to keep yourself warm. You don't ever know what's going to happen out in the backcountry. You got illumination, which is your flashlights, your headlamps, your lanterns, even maybe the flashlight on your phone. I mean, not a great choice, but it's better than nothing. Of course, as we were just talking about it a couple of moments ago, first aid supplies, which is your first aid kit or your FAK, um, fire, matches, lighters, anything to start a fire. Because if you get out there and you're going to run into a situation where you might need to have a fire to get yourself warmed back up, or even to make food. Um, Repair kits, tools, uh, the two best ones are definitely going to be duct tape, knife, or a multi tool or something to that extent. Carry it. I guarantee you will want that. Um, Pretty much everywhere you go, actually. Nutrition, food, um, sustenance, those kind of things are really important. Uh, Now, yeah, you could survive a lot longer without food, but you also don't want to be hangry or anything like that. So that's something to consider. So definitely bring some snacks, some trail snacks, keeps your energy up. Hydration. So we were just talking about hydration and water. Basically, just make sure that you have the ample equipment to be able to drink water, maybe have some electrolytes. And if you're going out way out in the boonies, as I like to say, bring some form of water treatment like chlorine tablets, or even just like iodine, or even a pump in some cases. I'm not a fan of the pumps, but whatever. That's just me. Um, and last but not least, if you're going to be out for a longer period of time, definitely bring some form of shelter. That means your tents. That means your sleeping bag, um, tarps if you are more roughing it. So there's definitely a lot of supplies. So just to kind of quick go over those again: navigation, sun protection, insulation, illumination, first aid supplies, fire, repair kits, nutrition, hydration, and emergency shelter stuff.
Essentially, with the 10 essentials, they're the guidelines for all outdoor adventures, not just for day hikes, but also for camping, canoeing, kayaking. It does sometimes seem extreme if you're going out for a 2 hour day hike, but it's meant to be an emergency prep, essentially.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more emergency prep. You don't want to get caught out somewhere remote and not know where you are. Now, are all these things really that important if you're going on your first day hike? No, I would say that probably out of all these things, water, food, and um, sun protection and or insulation are probably all you really actually need to bring for your first time around.
I
But
would add first. I mean, I would also add a pocket first aid kit or possibly navigation, depending on where you're going.
yeah,
I
definitely
would
all
definitely
depends.
add navigation no matter where you're going, even if it's just one of
Yeah,
those printable maps you get at the counter at the state park or something.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
helps you
those are
find
good
your
to have.
way.
Those are good to
Especially,
have.
it's especially when you're starting out. You can don't be afraid to bring a little bit more than you may need, as you will learn over time and experience what you can, how to work with less.
hmm One
As
thing I always told my new scouts, because when we would go on day hikes with our troops, they'd always be like, "Why do I have to have a flashlight in my backpack?" And again, it's all about the emergency prep. Because say you're out deeper in the backcountry and you get lost, and you don't get back before the day's over, if you have that flashlight, you can signal with it. You can just see what's in front of you with it. So a lot of the 10 essentials are just to prepare for worst case scenarios.
Hmm.
yep.
Yeah.
And now that we started gotten through a lot of the safety discussion, let's talk about actually picking a location. As sometimes where you go can really matter and encourage you to go hiking more often. So, as you're starting out, we recommend that you find something close by and near near civilization, essentially.
Hmm.
Because, as we said, more with the safety, if you get hurt, it'll take less time for help to arrive. This doesn't mean that it can't be beautiful or cool. A lot of the local and state parks aren't too far out and can provide some fantastic trails to begin with.
And a lot of those state parks do have emergency services within them. So if they are a little bit out, but you have your phone or some way to contact the station, they can have rangers sent out to find you.
Yeah. The big thing is to avoid deep backcountry trails, especially if they're outside of some of the normal park areas. And when you're starting out, as we said, hiking can be physically intense, so let's go light on the mileage. We'd recommend for your first hike to be around 3 to 5 miles, will which at about 5 miles will take about 2 to 3 hours of walking. Not, of course, not including variations on elevation or weather.
Yeah, it's really important to keep those things in mind. Yeah, you might choose to do a 5 mile hike, but if you live in an incredibly hilly area, you might not want to do a 5 mile hike your first time. You might choose to instead just take a 2 or 3 mile hike through some of the more hilly terrain as opposed to something longer, which maybe won't stress you out as much um, as doing 5 miles on that terrain. So it's a good thing to just keep in mind.
Another good thing, basing off the hilly thing, um, if you use like Google Maps or some like online map service that tells you how long your walking speed or my best example is a biking speed, that's for a hilly area, that's always going to be wrong. Because one time in OAC, we did a biking that was like 30 miles, and it said it would take us, I think, I forget how long it takes to bike 30 miles, probably like 2 hours, if that sounds about right.
Yeah, 2 to 3 hours depending.
Yeah. Anyway, it took us a lot longer than that, and it was nighttime by the time we were still 5 miles from our location because we were in southwest Wisconsin where everything is a hill. You
Oh
just
yeah.
go downhill and back up one on these county roads biking. It was terrible. And I'm glad I had my flashlight, or I probably would have got hit by a semi.
Yeah, because those semi
No
they drive
lie.
out there, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even
they're pretty active out there. I've noticed that.
even we can tend to bite off more than we can chew, which is why when you're starting out, less is really more when it comes to mileage. Speaking of a less is more type of attitude, you don't want to be breaking the bank depending on where you go, which is why we decide why you should pick something close by, but also focus more on some of the local parks and trails. Some
Mhm.
states and national parks can be pretty expensive, especially if you are not going to be going to them often. So take a look around to local parks, bike trails, nature preserves. Essentially, look for places that may not be as packed and in exchange also not be as expensive.
Yeah. I'm still always a big fan, especially here in Wisconsin, of the state parks because all of them, except Devil's Lake, are pretty reasonably priced. I believe it's $8 for a day pass and I think $28 for the year pass.
I
And
think that's actually does that apply for all of them?
it
Like
applies
you can
for
go
all of them except Devil's Lake because Devil's Lake
except
is
for
the most
yeah.
popular
I
one.
always knew Devil's Lake was a weird one, but that's
Um,
because
yeah,
Devil's Lake is kind of their crown jewel.
yeah, everyone goes to that one. I think the year pass is still the same price there, but their day pass is much higher.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But anyway,
their the day pass is about $13
yeah.
for a
So
resident, 16 for non-resident.
Hmm.
yeah, so but like going to Governor Dodge, which is the closest one to my college, that one's $8 for a day, and you just get to go in there, hike around. I think it might even just be $8 for the card, not for how many people are in it. I believe that's how our
Yeah,
state parks do it. Yeah, so if you
Yeah,
want to
it's
shove five people into a car, you split $8 five ways. It's not too bad. But again, national parks, we don't have any national parks around my college, but those can get up in price.
yeah. And in exchange for some of the bigger parks, there may be some trails with larger attractions. While these can be cool, this may take away from some of the nature, and you will also be having more people crowding the trails, which both can slow your hike and can lead to some less than fun encounters.
yeah. I think I'll pull the old quote. The adventure is not the destination; it's everything in between. So, um, yeah, you want to definitely invest in. You want to put your you want to spend your time, or even in some cases your money on not on like the ground grand jewel of a park or the grand jewel of like we get to see this lovely view. You want to have something that has a good adventure to get to that position or to get to the end goal. Don't go to a place just because it's got a really cool thing at the end of the trail. If it's got a cool thing at the end of the trail, that's awesome. But if the hike or the experience of getting there is just way too expensive or just not really worth it, whether it's money wise or even you know or in like the time that you spend, what's the point, right, of doing it? Because it's not about the end goal, it's about everything in between.
Yep. And essentially, when we're going with picking a location, you want to do something that has a low overall cost, which means it being less physically taxing with lower mileage and easier terrain, a low price, ideally free, especially if you're just starting out and unsure of if you want to continue hiking, and have something a bit smaller scale. You let
Yeah.
yourself get connected with nature before you start trying to uh, hunt for the big sites. And after you pick your location, you can focus on a bit to make sure you have the gear needed, the 10 essentials. Again, if you're going into the backcountry, bring the 10 essentials. This is a safety focus, not a look how much stuff I can bring.
Yeah,
Bring what you need.
don't bring things you do not need.
Yeah.
And the best
Ma-
rule is the 10 essentials should fit in your day pack, so just a normal backpack and have space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I've seen people who fit their 10 essentials in an 8-liter glorified water bladder carrier. And I've seen them fit all the stuff they need in 8 liters, 7-liter bags. And for context, a school backpack usually is about 30. So trust me, you can fit them in there. Um, you should have plenty of room to spare.
another important thing for prep is to learn your route. Ideally, this you should understand conceptually where you're going before the trip. And you will if it's a larger park with more trails, it could be a little bit more challenging and you may want to spend more time prepping. But no matter where you're going, you want to spend time at least just getting familiar with where you need to go. I remember one of our first through hikes. Ben and I were looking around and we were essentially given a map that we ended up first going in the wrong direction before we ended up having to turn around and shoot the other way as we hiked, I think, 10 miles that day.
Huh? Where was that? Where was that one? Was
That
that
was um that was Ice Age Trail.
was that ice? Oh, that might. I think you're right.
Yeah, we were what 12, 13.
Yeah. I think that was my mistake. I think I was the one that thought he was so smart and knew exactly where we were going, and I had no idea. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I
I
learned
pulled
the
the
hard way not to. Or
I
to.
pulled the same thing one time, but it wasn't. It was a. I guess you could call it a hike because it took us 2 hours. But me and my friend were in downtown Chicago, walking around, and I had my GPS on my phone. You know that should be super easy to follow, right? I was going backwards, and I couldn't understand why time was being added to my route.
Yeah.
I don't know how I
Oh,
managed to pull that one, but that's 15-year-old Trevor for you. That was the day before I left for Philmont as well.
ooh.
So
Oh, lovely.
Speaking of Philmont, a little bit of just another little fun story about navigation. That's maybe a tad bit more sinister. Um, that kind of I think gets the point across here about learning your route before you take it is when I was at Philmont the second time around, I was in charge of navigation, and at the end of the day, I handed it off to the guy who was next in charge of navigation, and he's like, okay, sure, whatever, and then I hand him the map, and he doesn't look at the map the whole night to figure out what route we're taking. So when we get to our point where we need to figure out the split, I had looked at the map the night before and I knew there were two routes, so I didn't really care which one we took. I didn't really do any specific research, but it should have been 4 miles that we hiked that day. We ended up hiking 10 um, because he now didn't know where we were really going. He went and asked both of the adults on our trek, and both of the adults on our trek just so happened to be geologists with master's or higher level degrees, and they treated it like they were putting like they were trying to like develop some big expedition or something like that. So they told him to go one way and then forgot to do the first simple thing, which is to do a compass bearing. And we ended up going, I think it was 4 or 5 miles off course when it was 85 degrees outside, with three adults that were had all aching joints because it's like it's a funny story, but it's also a good one to kind of remind you to look at your route before you take it and to make sure that you um, look at the initial plan. Like no, like don't skip steps. Don't try and overcomplicate things, but don't oversimplify them. Because if you do, That's a really good way to get lost, and I have learned that a few too many times. Yeah.
Speaking of creating stories, bring your friends. That's Hiking can be enjoyable as a solo reflective experience, but it can also be a blast bringing other people. Just make sure they understand what is going on, especially if you don't want to be called a lot of names.
William, you might have a story there.
I
Yeah,
don't know if we should tell that story.
No, boy.
Just make sure they know that hikes will have inclines and they will be hard, and that you're not a bad person for doing said hikes.
yeah.
Yes,
Well,
yes,
just in
very
a
important.
long story short, when you do a hike as a date, make sure you let them know how hilly it'll be, or else you may get called some names as you're hiking.
If you do a
Hey,
hike
but
as a date, make sure they like the outdoors or you're already going wrong.
hey, she actually had a blast.
Okay,
At the-
okay. That's good. That's good then.
I mean, she was the one who
Although you shouldn't be
mentioned.
leading a hike as a date if it's your first hike. So I don't think the people listening to us right now are too worried about that.
Yeah, well, you could both struggle together.
True,
Yeah,
if it's
well.
both your first hikes, then at least at least you both know
At least you're all
on
in
the
this
same
together.
page.
Yeah,
Remember, friends who suffer together stay together.
exactly.
Oh, that's why we're making this podcast.
Oh yeah,
Exactly. So let's.
yeah.
And then-
as we discussed last time, bringing your friends is a really, really good thing to do when you're going out on any adventure, whether you're going camping or hiking or canoeing or kayaking or mountaineering or whatever. Bringing your friends, you can build friends that will last a lifetime. You will have so many weird and hilarious stories, so many inside jokes. I guarantee you, yeah, you can do a hike on your own, and it can be really fun. It can be really good to do that, and it's really important to do that every once in a while. But humans are social creatures, and we work really well when we're all together. So, bringing your friends, getting them all on the same page, and saying, "We're gonna do this, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do it well."
And
think
we're
that's
gonna
really-
like it.
And we're gonna like it even though we hate it in the moment. It's second class fun.
Sometimes, as long as you can embrace the unexpected.
Type 2 fun.
It sounds like my first trip to Philmont, where we were one of the slowest crews out there. I think we were going like a mile an hour, and it rained every day. And you know what my favorite camping trip ever is? Going to Philmont my first time.
Yeah. Going to Philmont. I've gone twice now, and it's
I also spent a lot of money on rain gear because of my first trip to Philmont.
Yeah.
Essentially. Oh, we should likely do a quick explanation of what Philmont is.
Oh yes,
So-
that's important.
Philmont is a Boy Scout ranch down in New Mexico.
One of the
And-
4 national high adventure bases.
Yep. And when essentially the main appeal is going backpacking through the mountains.
For
I
12
think that's
days.
the only kind of trek they offer, though.
Exactly.
They offer a horse trek.
Oh, they do.
Oh,
offer
that's
horseback.
right.
And they offer an
Yeah.
ATV.
I did a
Thing.
trail building trek, so I was swinging a McLeod and a Pickmatic for a week. Wait, you don't
That
swing a
actually
McLeod.
sounds
That would
really
break
fun,
it.
and your hands were probably filled with blisters from my experiences with Pickmatics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even we've all had our share of more of the intense adventures and the fun little day hikes.
Yeah.
And for any of them, as long as you can embrace the unexpected and keep a relatively good attitude when things start to suck, you can turn what would seem like a bad day into a fun story.
Oh yes, this
Every
is
time.
really important. You got to keep a really good attitude. Keep it on the positive, because you'd rather not You don't want to make something bad just because you don't feel great. Okay. Um, Being out in the outdoors is not only an experience, it's a privilege. It's a privilege we all have. Um, to be able to go on any form of adventure, even if it's a small little quick day hike, it's always a privilege that we get to be out in the wilderness, to have a little bit of time out away from other people. Um, so I think in general, it's a very good idea to keep to keep positive in that regard. Stay positive. You'll have a much better time. And if somebody else is being negative, try
Hit 'em
and
with a
get
rock.
them to be positive. So yeah,
No hitting with rocks.
no
We
hitting
do not
with rocks.
we do not formally endorse that.
No.
As if you hit
Take
someone
their
with a,
Nalgene, open it up, take the splash guard, and push it in. So they have to drink all their water, not when they're walking, to get their splash guard out.
That is actually like almost as bad as stepping on Legos.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the rudest thing to do for especially for like week-long hikes where you have a full day of hiking. If you do that at the beginning of the day, they'll probably beat you up.
That is like the
speaking
greatest act
of
defiance.
being beaten up,
Oh no.
Oh no.
I think it's time for us to quickly wrap this up. So again, embrace the unexpected. Ideally, not getting beaten up.
Yeah,
but
don't do that.
Have some fun even when things go wrong. And we will cover we'll be covering gear for a day hike and for longer day hikes in our next episode. So
More
get
than
planning.
just the 10 essentials, because
Yes,
that was like half of today's thing. We'll go over that for like 5 minutes, and then we'll talk about like the other stuff, the things I like to bring.
All those stuff that's really important.
And we can go a bit more on what out of those 10 essentials to focus on and how to build that. So get planning and take a day for adventure.